Welcome to the latest episode of Skytale Insights. My name is James Turcott, and I'm excited to be joined by Ali Oromchian, founder of Dental and Medical Counsel. Thanks for taking the time with us today.
Yeah, thanks, James. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for scheduling this.
Awesome. Yeah, we love having firms like yourself on that are familiar with the space, both in the dental and medical aesthetic world. But we always love to start with some background about you and the firm, and really how'd you kind of get into this healthcare space? So we'd love to just touch on that real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for asking. And I feel like no one really starts out doing medical or aesthetics, dental kind of work. And I'm just like that. I kind of fell into it. My wife is a pediatric dentist here in Northern California. And as I was doing the big firm life, as a lawyer, I started working with her, classmates and co-residents and whatnot, and then just realized, oh my gosh, this is so much more fun than what I was doing, and it just kind of, I broke off from the firm at that point and did my own thing. And it's been great. I mean, I love working with entrepreneurs, but, entrepreneurs who, have been told from the first day of school, whether they're in medical school, dental school, veterinary, optometry, whatever, that, they should work for either a hospital or a big group or whatnot. And so many of these students come out and they're ready to become business owners. And it's a lot of fun to hold their hand through the whole thing. Especially since they don't get a ton of business education in school.
Yeah, no, I love that. And honestly, that's a lot of how our firm, I think, got created as well, and wanting to help kind of those entrepreneurial, like-minded, medical providers really, help kind of grow and scale their practice. So, it's fun to kind of hear from the other side, how you guys are thinking about it. And really to just jump right in, from a let's talk about the entrepreneurial type of doctor, right? So when they're thinking about going out and thinking about starting their own business or thinking about, structuring it, what do you guys, look for, advise on, what does that structure look like for starting their business? And how do you guys kind of just have some good back and forth with them?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that question, because a lot of the calls we get are typically, hey, I want to do, I want to open my own office, or I want to do a med spa, or, I'm working as an associate and I think I can do things better. And they ask the right questions, which is, well, what should my setup be? Maybe I have a partner, maybe I don't. But I always kind of take a step back and I ask them, well, what are your goals? Right? Like, why are you wanting to do this? What is your interest level? Like, are you doing it because you feel like you have to, or is it because of some other desire? And typically what that does, James, is that it opens up this whole world of conversation that I have with them about, their desires and their goals and where they want to be and why they're doing this. And it's funny you bring up aesthetics, because I see this a lot on the aesthetic side, where maybe you have an emergency room physician who wants to do a med spa, right? And it's not in their kind of bread and butter everyday kind of work, but they want to do it, and so they found a PA or an RN, and it's like, well, okay, great, but why do you want to do that? Because there's a certain level of risk that comes with it, right? Sure. Obviously the plastic surgeons, it's like a no-brainer for them, right? Dermatologists, no-brainer for them to set something up. But we're seeing a lot of dentists do it. I've done a couple of optometry aesthetic partnerships, which is kind of cool, and so we talk about their goals, and then once we've got that figured out, it opens up a lot of conversation in terms of the legal structure, right? And for the most part, to do it right, we've got to go down the road of the, management services organization. They go by different names, right? Medical services organization, dental services organization, there's like 1,000 names.
A lot of acronyms.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot.
No, that's awesome. I think, and you bring up such a cool point, because like medical aesthetics is fairly new, right? At the end of the day, and how it's kind of grown within the industry of healthcare, and some even call it consumer. But you brought up the interesting point of dental and having medical aesthetics rolled into that, or optometry and having medical aesthetics rolled into that. Like, talk a little bit about that structure? Like how do you kind of view in your eyes, do you structure it in the same way? Is there a little bit of different, intricacies of structuring the med spa side versus dental or optometry or whatever? I'm curious how does that play?
Yeah. I mean, typically, as you probably have seen in, thousands of times and with your clients, the separation of powers is really important, right?
Yeah.
And so if we're doing a dental, an opto kind of partnership with a med spa, we try to keep the dental opto side separate from the med spa side, right? And in some states, you can, as an optometrist, you can be part of the med spa. Sometimes from a dental perspective, you can be part of the clinical side of the med spa. Sometimes you can't, and you got to be just part of the management side, through a management services organization. So there's all these kind of different entities and groups that sort of interplay with one another. But the overarching idea is keeping liability separate, right? Because what happens on the dental side should stay with dental. Same thing with the med spa and whatnot. And then, but then giving them co-ownership of maybe a management, organization where some of the money and expenses can be kind of funneled through that. And I don't mean funneled like in an illegal way, but funneled in sort of a legal way.
Yep.
We're not moving money to like the Cayman Islands here, right?
Right.
But just kind of moving stuff, in between those entities that rightfully should be paid for services that they're providing. And it can be a really nice, recurring revenue or, revenue model for the partners.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point with the entity structure. So for our listeners that maybe want, or, maybe we have dental offices that want to create the med spa or optometrists, whatever it is, how strict are you of having separate entities? Because we see a lot of the times everyone just mixes the bag, right? Like they have, the revenue in states that it's allowed. They have the revenue coming in from the med spa side and the dental side all in one P&L, and it's hard to delineate. So how strict or how pushy are you on, okay, we need to separate these out?
Yeah. I mean, in a perfect world, I want to be pretty strict with it, right? I want to be pretty strict with it. And the reason is, you just never know when the state boards will come down hard on these structures. I mean, the reality is that some states are a little bit harsher than others, but most states are pretty hands-off these days on these DSO, MSO structures. And when you think about it, it's sort of surreal that they don't do more about it, because you do in certain scenarios have non-clinicians, involved in entities that, in a perfect world, based on the board rules, shouldn't be involved, right? But through these creative, structures, but more importantly, through proper legal planning, you can have these structures, and they are legal and they are okay. But you just never know which state is going to suddenly raise their hand and say, you know what, enough is enough, right? And so I think keeping it totally strict, totally separate, and keeping it above board keeps everyone safe, because then the risk of getting in trouble with any of the state boards is very low, even if they decide to come down hard.
Yeah, and we're going off on a tangent here, but I actually kind of like it because I think it's a big ticket item, just with the amount of money that's coming into the medical aesthetic space, right? And how it's grown from a private equity perspective. From a regulatory standpoint, maybe just, a flyover of what do you think we could expect? And I know we're going off topic here a little bit, but it's fascinating to me just thinking about the future a little bit. And to your point, keeping things separate and, making sure that you can kind of define in a certain way. Like, what in your mind, how do you kind of see this going with the amount of money coming into the space? If dental's anything like medical aesthetics will be, like, what in your mind does that look like?
I think if something was going to happen, James, it would have happened already. I think we're past that line. And I'll give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. um, the veterinary space,
Mm-hmm.
right? The veterinary space is pretty much 100% run, pretty much 100% run by these MSOs,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's like a handful of large corporations out there that run almost every very successful, vet practice around the country, and they're buying as many as they can, right? And they slow down a little bit because of the interest rate situation and whatnot. But so there hasn't been anything done there. States are moving towards less regulation than more
Mm-hmm.
in some of these areas. Like I think Arizona allows non-lawyers to give legal advice now, right? Which is crazy. To do. I don't know if I'm not a lawyer, I don't want to give legal advice, right? Because there's so much liability that comes with it, right? It's like if I'm not a CPA, I'm not giving tax advice because the last thing I want is someone to get audited. But I think we've already moved down this road, and because like you said, the money is there, the big money is there in this space, that I think if states started to move towards more regulation, the smart money would come in and kind of squash that, because there's so much at stake for them.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I love that take. I mean, it's good for us. We'll continue to see growth. We'll continue to see it move. And it's interesting, just like the state by state type of, thought and regulations, because I think every time we're working with a client, it's almost like reteaching yourself, like what are they actually allowed to do in this state versus this state versus this state, and making sure that you're kind of talking to them accordingly. So, it's just interesting how severe of the different ends of the spectrum it could be state by state.
100%. And we're each actually in polar opposite states, right? You're in Texas, and you guys, don't have a lot of rules regarding this kind of stuff. Even there are some regulations, but there's a reason why most DSOs, MSOs are there, in Texas. Now in California, typically regulatory wise, we're on the opposite end of that spectrum, right? But in this regard, there hasn't been as much, which is great, like you said, for all of us, and it's great for business, because we see more med spas here than any other state, and they're all thriving, they're all doing great, and it's giving opportunities to RNs and PAs that typically wouldn't, and NPs that wouldn't typically have the opportunity to own their own business, right? It's like, hey, I'm a PA, I'm going to go open a hospital. No, that's not going to work, but they're going to be able to have their med spa and have a nice, nice revenue from that.
Yeah. And, we've done deals where on the dental side, we've had clients or potential clients that are in California, and the appetite for that on the dental side just isn't as heavy as what it has been on the medical aesthetic side. So I think you bring up a really valid point, to where I don't think there's as much fear, I guess I'll say, from the private equity side or institutional capital entering the California market, because they're able to kind of move, I'll call it, somewhat freely throughout kind of the state. So, we've done a couple deals even this year or this past year within California. So, we've definitely seen activity there. And to your point, it's actually really fun to not be shut down immediately saying, no, it's California and I don't want to go to California. And people are open to moving out there, which is great.
Exactly. I think if there's one thing that prevents maybe companies from coming to California, at least in this realm, doesn't have to do with that regulatory environment. It has to do more with HR and employees and that side of the system. And but if they're using a system like HR for Health, which then they don't have that issue, because all their compliance is taken care of. And so I guess what I'm saying is that there's solutions, right? There's solutions for these problems, as long as they're doing it correctly. But if they're going in blind, then it could be problematic. And it's funny. It's a good segue to kind of the next question I had when we were talking about employees and HR. And so non-competes continue to be a big talking point in not only medical aesthetics, but just healthcare in general. And, on the dental side, you've got associates and so on, and hygienists and so on and so forth. And so, in your mind,
how do you guys approach that, I guess, from the non-compete standpoint, and whether one, it's enforceable, or is there a way to protect your practice if they aren't enforceable? Like what's the conversation with your clients on that front?
So there's a couple of parts to this, James, that are really important. So the first part, I think, to remember is that non-competes, when you hear about it in the news or you read about it, it has less to do with partnerships. It has more to do with employees and that aspect of the non-compete law. And I'll explain why in a second. If you want, if you're in a state like California that makes non-competes for employees completely unlawful, it's been compared to slavery, right? And so like you just can't have it, right? You just can't have it in a state like California.
Yeah.
Now, states like Georgia, right? It's totally different, right? Like Georgia is kind of lawless when it comes to non-competes and things of that nature. You can compete and whatnot, but most states you can't unless it's, or you can unless it's unreasonable, which usually means it's like 3 to 7, 10 miles, right? Like you can do that. But the law is changing in this regard very quickly, and we're expecting the federal government to pass a rule, sometime this spring under the FTC that basically makes non-compete totally unlawful nationwide. All right. And the idea there is that there's so many different laws so many different laws in each state about this. They just want to make it uniform. Right. And so states like California, it'll make no difference because it's already unlawful here. Right. Texas, Hawaii, Illinois, some other states, it's where it's like, it can be reasonable distance, like Florida, then there it's going to be unlawful. And so they're going to have a major change. And then states like Georgia, it's going to be even bigger. Now, what I think people don't realize, though, and I hear this all the time, and I'm sure you see it too, non-competes within partnerships is going to always be legal.
That was going to be my next question. So you took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that makes sense, right? We don't want partners to compete with one another if their partnership, doesn't work out, or even if it is working out. Like if you and I are partners, you wouldn't want me to open up a med spa if we already have one 3 miles down the road, right? Totally. I mean, it would compete with your business or our business. And so people have to just remember non-competes and partnerships is going to always be legal. Non-competes when you're buying someone's practice or business, you can hold the seller accountable. That's going to always be legal, at least from what we've seen, in terms of proposed rules from the FTC.
And it's a good point you bring up from the partner perspective or selling your business perspective, because I don't want that to get lost in translation, because we do have sellers that get non-competes put in front of them, and that is still applicable to them at the end of the day. The other aspect, so going back to even just the partnership stuff, so how do you protect the practice, right, from a hygienist leaving or from an associate leaving or from an injector or like, is there a creative way that you've seen people get comfortable with protecting their practice from someone taking their book of business or whatever it is at the end of the day? Because I think people are trying to figure out how to get creative.
Yeah. I mean, there's a number of ways. No way is perfect, right? No way is perfect. But some of our clients, what they do is they give small percentage ownership to some of their more high value employees that they don't want to leave, right? Like you said, like, a rock star hygienist, a rock star injector or whatever, like you just don't want this person to leave. So you give them 1%, 5%, something like that. There's some argument that if somebody owns that little, that you still can't hold them accountable to.
That was going to be my next question. So,
Now I'm reading. See, this is where it's fun because we see so many of them, in our lines of business, James, that exactly where I'm going with a lot of these questions, with a lot of these answers. But But yeah, I mean, so there's a little bit of mixed feeling about that, about whether it actually will hold up or not. Some people, what they'll do is they'll increase the compensation for the employees to such a high number that it would be hard for them to go elsewhere. But of course, that's not perfect because it eats at your P&L, right,
Totally.
and your profitability and whatnot. You know, and so there's no perfect way. I think what I always say is, people want to be treated well. People are not afraid of working hard, right? And I always talk about it with my team. I go, there's good stress and then there's bad stress, right? Good stress is when we're working hard and we're making things happen. Business is not always perfect, but you're working through ideas, working through problems together, and you're just growing, right?
Yep.
You're doing what you can to build the business. Bad stress is when everyone is being yelled at and no one feels safe, and people are always looking for another job because they don't know where the business is going, and if there's any objectives, all that stuff that comes with bad stress. That's what makes people leave.
Yep.
Right, that's what makes people leave.
Yep.
And and sometimes you don't know that until it's too late, because people think the grass is always greener on the other side. And I'm sure in your experience, in your life, you've experienced what I've experienced, which is the grass is not always greener on the other side. In fact, a lot of times there is no grass, it's just fake.
And a lot of times they end up coming back to the practice after they leave, or asked to come back to the practice after they leave, because they kind of understand what they had. And so we have a couple team members here who have ran dental and aesthetic practices, and they kind of preach that same notion of if you create that culture that nobody will find elsewhere, then that's a retention tool within itself at the end of the day. So I think I love that point, and how to non-competes are sticky, and they continue to be a sticky subject, but I think there's definitely different ways to figure that one out. And as you kind of grow, it becomes more employees, right? It becomes more HR headaches. It becomes more administrative headaches. But, talk a little bit about why people go out and form those DSOs or MSOs, and why they have MSAs or management services agreements down to the practice. Like, in your opinion, what's kind of the benefits of those? How does it kind of help the organization? What kind of flexibility does it create? What's kind of your overarching thought there?
I think, to me, it's the rules of engagement, right? It's like the rules of engagement. It's what are the parties going to do? What are their roles and obligations? And how do we make sure the money flows in and out correctly to not only kind of help the business continue to grow, but also pay people fairly for the contribution that they've made, right? And so there's that rule of engagement that's detailed in an MSA. And for those of you that don't know what that is, that's a management services agreement, which is between the clinical entity and the management entity that is created in a typical MSO DSO structure. And it's a very complicated document because it's got a lot of legal components for protections, regulatory and otherwise, liability, and so on and so forth. And then there's the operational side of who's going to do what, when, and how. And to me, that's that it's a guidebook of making sure the business runs well. Now, what we do, James, is we work so closely with our clients to put this MSA together that I always tell them, I never want you to look at it again. Right? Like I want to put it together. I want to sit down with you as partners. Let's work through it all.
Yeah.
I want you to know everything that's in this thing, so you never look at it again, because who wants to look at a legal document to figure out like what to do, right? But if there's communication between the parties, things will just flow. And that's our goal. And thankfully, knock on wood, we've been very successful in with our groups because of that.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate a point that you said. It's not get it completed and put it to the side and I'm never going to look at it and I don't understand it. It's I understand it. I know how the flow of funds should work. I know what to charge in management fee. I know how to communicate to my accounting team. I know how to utilize this in a way to where I don't have to look at it because it's running the right way. So I think that point that you made is a fantastic one, because there's several times where we have clients that go through this process and they say, great, here's, to your point, here's that 100 pages of documents that I just paid thousands of dollars for, and I'm just going to put it to the side and it doesn't matter anymore. And so for us, how do we utilize that appropriately? So I thought that was funny, because we run into that a lot with current clients, former clients, leads, whatever it is, and how they talk about that, because it's daunting, right? Like there's a lot of paper in that stack. And so, how can we simplify it? How can we make them understand, or help them understand, I should say, how to kind of move through it appropriately. So yeah, it's funny you said that.
Yeah. And we know what we see a lot is people like will borrow like a friend's, right? Like they'll like Google it and they'll like, find something and be like, oh, I'm just going to use this. And it's like that's not the point,
Right.
that it's not about, like you said, it's not just about having a legal document in some box. It's about really knowing what it's all about, so you can actually make things happen for the better. And we see this with employment manuals all the time too. People will like Google something,
Yep.
and then or they'll go on some like random website, download some, and then be like, oh yeah, I've got an employment manual. And it's like, no, that's not how that works,
Yeah, and I mean, you've got to like reinvest in the business, right? At the end of the day, and to invest in the business is to invest in the right documents, the right people, the right resources that allow you to not only like, I think there's some short-term gain and not thinking long-term of doing some of those things of where you're Googling stuff and trying to be efficient. But at the end of the day, if you get down the road and you have to unwind it all, well, that's even more money that you're spending to try and unwind it. And so,
100%.
yeah, so I that point of, realistically, it's professionalizing the business at the end of the day. And if you truly want to professionalize the business, you've got to find those resources that can allow you to do that, and then follow them, right? Like you're not paying them just to talk to you, you're paying them to help you and guide you and be vulnerable to allow them to guide you in the right way. And that's really where we see all the businesses we work with be successful at the end of the day, is being that vulnerable self and being open, right, to finding that outsource help that frankly specializes in what, they're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. We have this case right now that, you had a plastic surgeon that meant well. You have family members that are, part of the investment group, for this plastic surgeon. They hooked up with an RN, and they went, to someone with no experience in this at all, to put together basically like a partnership agreement between them, that didn't detail any of the stuff that we, are talking about today.
Right.
And the thing is now falling apart. Less than a year since they started, they signed a 10-year lease. They got a loan, for a couple lasers and other things. So, I mean, it's just unwinding it is so much more difficult than having to do it right the first time. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong, hiring you guys, hiring us is not necessarily a cheap endeavor.
Sure.
But it's an investment in the business. And to me, it's like, if you're not willing to spend $5,000, you're not willing to spend $10,000, you're not willing to put these investments on in getting insurance policies and so on, this isn't the business for you, right? There may be another business, but you got to invest to make sure you're safe. And then you professionalize it, like you said perfectly, and then you go from there, because the revenues are there. I mean, we have so many $3, $4, $5 million med spas and dental practices, and I mean, they're incredible, but none of them started off with a house of cards.
Hey, House of Cards. That's funny. I love that one. Yeah. And we're getting right into, I think, kind of, what we wanted to close out with was, when we think about mistakes, frankly, that practices make, and, as they grow or, as they scale, in your mind, and you mentioned already a case, but, what have you seen in the space, call it mistake wise or learning experience, opportunities? What does that look like in the space for you?
You mean like in terms of pitfalls, like potential
Yeah,
pitfalls?
yeah, like pitfalls and things that just come across your desk that you're just shaking your head at.
Yeah, I mean, we do so much work, James, on the HR side.
Yeah,
That's always, I feel like that's always the first thing that pops into my mind when it comes to potential issues that come across all different genres, whether they're dental and DSOs, whether they're MSOs on the med spa space, optometrists, it doesn't matter. I feel like the issues on the HR side with the team are like a silent killer, right?
yeah,
And what I mean by that is you think everything is going well, but then suddenly you get hit with an administrative claim or a demand letter or whatever, and it does so many it does so many negative things to the business. And I don't mean just financially, but of course there's a financial side, but it's sort of rotting the system from the business from the inside out, because now the doctor or the partners don't trust the team anymore. It's like, oh, is she or he gonna sue me? Or like, what am I doing wrong? Or did I just say the wrong thing? And I always say, like, when you're starting a business like this, whether it's your first one or you've had a couple of already, just get your HR house in order, right? Use a system like HR for Health so that you've got a strong foundation.
yep,
You can put it on auto drive. They clock in and clock out. They have all the new hire forms. They have everything you need, including a manual. And then you just never look back knowing that you're safe. Now, it's not a guarantee you won't ever get sued, but if God forbid you are sued, at least the penalties and the costs are going to be super low because you got a lot of good documentation and backup. So
100%.
that's the one that like pains me, because some of it is out of their control,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, the out of the control one is always interesting because you don't know what's going to pop up, but kind of taking the steps to ensure that you are covered,
Yeah.
makes sense, and frankly, it's again, it's reinvesting in the business. It's making sure that while the fun stuff is growing revenue and and building the practice and adding new providers, there's the back end stuff that if you're not, kind of looking out for it and again, doing it, the right way or professionalizing it, like that'll come back to bite you at the end of the day too.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%, 100%. So I think if there's one lesson learned is, if you're listening today, just, do the right thing from the beginning. Be smart about your investment in the business, but invest in the right things and then slowly, grow from there. But make sure your foundation is strong with a strong team. And you guys do a great job of, setting that for them and letting them know what they need to do in terms of setups and whatnot. And then we, of course, help with the legal side. And, when it all comes together, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it's a lot of fun playing in the space and, seeing it grow. And, we hope that it continues to do so, into the future. But I'm staring at the San Francisco football behind your shoulder. So are you,
Yeah,
are you a Niner fan?
I am lifelong Niner fan. And, we've had our heart broken a few times in the last, 7 years, but this year it was like probably the hardest.
Yeah, it was close. It was close. They'll get there at some point. I mean, I think they're too good not to. So I hope you're able to live that one out and see them raise a trophy.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. Me too. Yeah, it was funny because the Super Bowl happened, and then like 3 days later, 4 days later, I was like turning on Netflix, and there was like this documentary about the Buffalo Bills on there, right? About how like they made it to the Super Bowl 4 times and lost all four or whatever, and I'm like,
it's taunting
this
you.
is not what I want to see.
It's haunting you. That's hysterical. Yeah. It's like they're listening to you and they know.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, awesome. Thanks so much for taking the time with us. This has been a ton of fun to kind of talk through, all the different intricacies within the spaces that, we play in, and always appreciate the insight, from a legal perspective and what kind of, that looks like. So, hopefully our paths cross here, again soon, but, want to say thank you for taking the time and sharing some insights with us.
Yeah, no, thank you, James. I love talking to you and the entire team. Annie's awesome, and your whole team is our rock star. So we enjoy working with you guys, and more importantly, we enjoy kind of helping people get from ideas to actual like dreams coming true, with their new businesses and taking that entrepreneurial journey. So thanks for inviting me.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much. And we'll see you next time on the Skytale Insights podcast.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.